Hello, welcome to an extended conversation with, and you'll have to get this straight because it's on again at 8 o'clock. And we have multiple producers here. We have the fastest fingers in the world operating in this studio with Paul, who's on at 8 o'clock. And he has his own conversation program with the experience of all the networks, DeRienzo. And my name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the executive director of Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And here in the studio, I'm going to pass the mic around and have everybody introduce themselves to you.
I am the world's foremost authority, Professor Irwin Corey. Many people wonder on what. It's none of their business.
And I'm Miss Joan Moossy, and I'm a co-host of Let 'em Talk with Paul DeRienzo at 8 o'clock, and I hope you'll come back and see us there with all our guests again.
I'm Dr. Jeannie Tartell, co-author of the newest fitness book called Get Fit in Bed.
And I'm Ted Kavanaugh, a co-author with Jeannie Tartell of Get Fit in Bed.
And I'm Paul, and I'll stick my head in here. If I can figure out which way is left and right on television. I'm Paul DeRienzo, and the host with Joni, who you can see right behind us, of Let Them Talk, which is the program that follows at 8 o'clock. And we're going to continue on with some of the same conversations we're having here tonight when that show starts at 8. So stay tuned and keep your TVs tuned to Channel 56. So we're going to move on with the program, and I'm going to pass it back to Shannon, who is the regular host of this slot.
Thank you, Paul. I was at Stuyvesant High School this morning for Black History Month, and we had a sterling panel with Judge Jackson from the Supreme Court, and Judge Dowling from the Supreme Court, and Judge Alvin Yearwood from the Criminal Court, talking about into the 21st century and the continuing fight on racism. And then we had from the Friars Club, Cynthia Brown, talking about the evolution of African-American music, and approximately 150 or more students from all over the world. And I mentioned to the faculty and the administration, Mr. DeRienzo coming from radio, and they knew his name quite well. So, and they were trying to forget mine and remember his, which should have been no surprise to mine, but the credit did me good. So thank you, Paul.
I'm glad it did.
Black History Month.
Black History Month.
Notice it's the shortest month of the year.
No, I did not notice that, but you would.
Yeah, it's not that I noticed, but Black History. It's not Black History. It's the history of the blacks. Because when you say Black History, you're using black as an adjective. And black in lowercase lettering is an adjective. Anytime you use the word black, that's not an adjective, should be in capital letters. It's demeaning to put it in lowercase lettering. Would you put the word Jew in lowercase lettering when you're talking about some Shylock? No.
We also have authors here in the studio talking about health and fitness. Obviously, they didn't intend to talk about me. They intended to talk about the 92-year-old young Professor Corey, who you just heard from. And I had the great honor and privilege of meeting them on our friend the Joey Reynolds show from WOR. You see, I get around. You may not think, but I get around. And it's not because of health and fitness. I try my best, but it's not. And Mr. Kavanaugh, I was introduced to being one of the founding officers, vice presidents of CNN News in the day when it really was news. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kavanaugh, and we can take it from there.
Well, we wrote a book, Jeannie Tartell and I, called Get Fit in Bed. I was at CNN. I had saved a lot of money during my lifetime, and then I went broke. And because I was gambling in the stock market, and I went broke, and I was lying in bed and looking at the ceiling, and the cracks began to speak to me and said, do something. So I started exercising on a cot that I was living on. And after about a year, I had a series of exercises that I thought were, very relaxing, and they calmed the mind, which was interesting for me. Anybody can do these exercises. So I brought them to Dr. Jeannie Tartell, who's a Manhatttan chiropractor, and she looked at them, and she can tell you what she thought and what happened after that.
Took a look at the exercises that Ted had presented to me, and noticed that the patterning of the exercises made a lovely routine that was easy to follow and very, very understandable. And when I started to test these exercises with my patients to see how they would respond, it was wonderful to see that all stages of life and all stages of recovery, the patients were responding well to the exercises. But as Ted had said to me about the exercises, is that the exercises actually helped him to fall asleep at night. And my patients started to report the same things. And when I started to do the exercises myself, I found that I had this beautiful deep sleep. So not only were the exercises phenomenal in increasing your strength, increasing your endurance, increasing your flexibility, but they also promoted sleep, which in today's high-stress days and the use of all of the medications that they're using to help us, that they're promoting to help us sleep, this is a wonderful, natural way of reducing anxiety and in achieving a deep, wonderful sleep.
Now, Jeannie, what kind of a mattress do you recommend exercising on? Like, is a futon better, or a pillow top, or
anything that you're comfortable enough to be sleeping in is a mattress that you can use to do your
what about like a
exercises in.
Tempur-Pedic where it sinks? No,
Doesn't really matter. Your body adjusts to it, and it's just a matter of what your body is comfortable with. Yeah, there are no. I mean, I haven't. I'm sure if I had asked my patients what mattresses they were using, each of them would have come up with a different brand, and some of them were actors, so they were sleeping on sofa beds. Ted had actually done the exercises on a cot, and they were all getting the same results. They were getting an increase in just physical feeling of well-being, but the sleep was an important part, the increase in sleep. So, I mean, at that point I said to Ted, let's go for it. Let's do this book.
Is it true that some people sleep faster than others?
I would say just some people do fall asleep faster than others. Some people have that wonderful capability of being able to get right into bed and falling asleep. But other people just have thoughts going round and round in their head.
The experience I had was that even in the middle of the night, I would get up in the middle of the night worried, and you have repetitive thoughts. Many people have this. You get up in the same thought, and you say, well, I'm going to forget this thought and go to sleep. You can't sleep. You keep the same thing over and over. So I started doing the exercises at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and what happened after them is the thoughts normalized. And those things went away, and I found myself soon enough going back into a deep sleep. It was remarkable. Now, I'm not saying this is good for people that have real insomnia, serious problems, but if someone has just the usual problems we have in stresses, it's very relaxing. Now, interestingly, the medical community for decades was saying, do not exercise before you go to sleep. Don't do it. It keeps you awake. That was the advice. Well, I said this to Jeannie, and it's funny because we were starting to work on a book, and then the New York Times in January of last year did an article that the new research said exercise, even not moderate but heavier exercise, indeed helps most people go to sleep. So the whole thing they were teaching for years and saying for years turned out not to be true.
Flip-flop on that. Now, Professor Irwin Corey, do you have an exercise program?
Well, I'll tell you something. We got to relate often, or else if we don't relegate our energy to develop at least a curiosity, it leaves us not only in a state of morbidity, but clouded with disunity in such unification forms that leave a... What was the question?
I went broke many times just thinking about investing in the stock market. I never actually got to the point. And I got so broke just thinking about the stock market that I got to sleep right away every time I went to the bed wondering what I was going to be able to afford the next day.
Well, you know that song? The stock market's a funny place. It's the craziest place in town. The seats cost $500,000 cash, but the brokers won't sit down. There's the broker, the bull, and the bear. And the beer is not a joke. You get the bull till your bankroll's bare, and the broker says you're broke. And here is a song you hear the whole day long. Oh, the market's not so good today. Your stocks look kind of sick. In fact, they all drop down a point each time the tick is tick. You'll have to have more margin now in order any doubt. So you better come with a load of cash or we'll have to sell you out. I bought some elevator stock and thought I'd done well when the little bears all ran downstairs and rang the basement bell.
They still can carry a tune. Paul?
I made my money not only on the entertainment field. I made my money in the stock market. 2 years ago, I bought 1,000 shares of Prudential Real Estate for $1 a share. This year, 2 years later, the stock is selling for $200 a share. But I sold out at $1.50. I made a 50% profit right away.
Paul, what would you ask Irwin Corey?
Wow, there's so many questions. Professor Corey, you are an icon in the New York City area, and few people, I don't know if as many people know the good works that you've done over the years, as well as your work as a comedian, as a raconteur, as a professor of everything. Tell us a little bit about what, and I know you're an activist to this day, and tell me a little bit about your activism, what you're involved in and what you're working on, what projects that you're supporting right now.
What project I'm working on now?
Yes.
Well, I think rather than to expose myself before the object is completed, I think we should sustain our energy to look for things that areas need more concern. I don't think that we should be talking about inconsequential and things that don't make any sense or do make sense but don't matter is in relation to what is going on in the world today. They did 15 minutes of talk about that woman who died mysteriously and left $474 million to an infant whose parents are not yet necessarily been proven to be the ones that are going to be related to what the money is about. So we must understand that it's the priorities that we must enunciate, that we must try to clarify issues which disturb the world. For instance, Bush, who has violated the Constitution, by the way. The Constitution was never, ever ratified. It was the 10 amendments that were ratified. The 10 amendments should not be amendments, but they should be considered in the structure of the Constitution itself.
Well,
Because otherwise the Constitution has no...
Follow up briefly, because Professor
You
Corey,
think he's going to pause at this moment? You asked him a question, activism of 50 years, and he's going to pause at the causes. He's obviously lining up for paternity of that $475 million there.
Right, well, that was my question, because on several occasions I've heard you say, as you gave money to one good cause or another, that you were giving your
children's
children's
inheritance
money. And does that fit into the
That's
activist
true,
role?
that's true. I'm spending my son's inheritance while I'm alive. And I think that's what it is. I don't believe in inheritance, although unfortunately in my position I was able to leave whatever little I have to the greatest family that my son has devised. And I feel that if he was a wealthy man whose will was being read to the relatives, and they all sat around and listened to the will, and the will went, "This is my last will and testament. While I was alive, I spent all my money."
I would like to spend it all too, Irwin. Just let me
Professor-
have a chance.
Professor Corey, I know you ran for president in 1960. Would you consider another run?
What?
I know that you ran for president in 1960. Would you
It was
consider another one?
1959.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, and I got 4,000 votes in Chicago alone. And I had slogans. Corey will run for any party and bring his own bottle. Says vote for Corey. Relief is just a vote away. Vote for Corey and go on welfare.
Now I understand we also have a.
I had another slogan. Let's soak the poor. Well, why? Ezekiel said there's a wheel within a wheel, and we know that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But the rich can't get richer unless the poor get poorer. So we'll take it from the poor before the rich get it.
All I know is I never saw a dime yesterday, today, or today.
Well, Ted Kavanaugh, we have. I wanted to ask you a question because I heard about your role in one of the founders of the CNN, and which I guess means cable news network. Although nothing goes over cable anymore, it's all going over satellite. But tell us a little bit about your relationship with Ted Turner. I mean, how come he seems to be doing pretty well these days? Do you think he made the right decision in getting out of CNN?
No, I think he regrets it. When I heard that CNN was going to be started, Reese Schoenfeld invited me to go down there, and I turned it down because I said to myself, "Who's this guy down in Atlanta? You know, some sailor or something?" And no one took him seriously, including me. In fact, the news on they had news on the station they own, a UHF station called TBS. The news consisted of Bill Tush, who was the kind of comic figure at CNN, and next to him he had a dog, a real dog, and the dog wore a Cronkite mask. And they made fun of the news for 5 minutes, and that was the news that Ted Turner did. So I didn't take it seriously. And then I had to have a job. I needed a job, so I went down there. And I thought the thing couldn't work. No one thought it could work, and I didn't think it could work either. But
what's your history in journalism? Where did you cut your teeth in journalism?
Well, I started in television back in 1957. And then I worked at a bunch of stations, and I taught in a college. So I was one of the kind of pioneers. In fact, I worked when I was at Ithaca College, we did the very first television, live original television on cable in the history of the world. Because as you know, TV the cable was just what they call community antenna systems. And Ithaca was in a valley, like many places, couldn't get a signal. So they brought actually 2 CBS stations from New York State in there by cable. So the head of our department, Royal Coley, arranged with the owner of the system to allow us to come on the cable for an hour each night and do college programs. So that was, and I ran the studio, so that was the beginning of the first live origination. And interestingly,
and look how far it's come.
Look how far it's come. I'll just tell you one story. They had a show. One of the shows we had was a bunch of college professors discussing, matters of the world, and we had the Royal Coley, the head of the department. He was the moderator. And then what happened is the college teachers, this is back in 1957, demanded to be paid to go on this little college station and went on strike. And the only professor who stayed with the show and said, "I don't care about the money," was a fellow named Dr. Martin Abend, who you will recall maybe from Channel 5, 17 years of Channel 5. The first, I think, conservative commentator in the history of American television.
Right.
Very much hated by a certain faction in New York and very much loved by others. But whenever he was on, the switchboard lit up. And that's the reason I brought him to New York, because I worked with him there at Ithaca College.
I see. Very interesting. And so that's are you pleased by the direction that the cable news business and CNN has gone in over the last?
Well, the answer to that question is no, as far as CNN is concerned. But I'll tell you what's happening in journalism, in effect. In America, for all the decades from the founding of America, even before it, journalism was run by factions. Political factions each had their little broadside, their journal and everything else. So it really was very political. And then later in the 20th century, the idea came about, hey, we're going to be objective. News will be straight, and the editorials will be editorial, but they'll all be under control. So what's happened now with the proliferation of all these, the internet and cable and everything else, is it's gone back now to what it was at the beginning of the country, where you have very partisan cable operations. CNN is a liberal tilt, Fox is conservative, MSNBC is liberal, the 3 networks are basically liberal, talk radio is basically conservative. So it's returned to what it was back in the old days.
So the idea of journalism and television journalism and media journalism as having rules of the game are over. Those days are over.
The professionalism that they tried to inculcate in the colleges and everything, that's gone. So the fact is that now you have people coming out of the college. It's become a professional thing. You want to be a journalist, you go to college, take a degree. In the old days, if you wanted to be a journalist, you started, carrying coffee and in the newsroom, carrying papers, and you worked your way up. In fact, when I ran Channel 5 News, I worked there for 7 or 8 years, and I was a news director later on. Marvin Scott, who's still on the air at Channel 11, he went out and he worked for me then at Channel 5. He went out and did a story in New Jersey, and he came back with a different story, a much better story. I said, Marvin, where'd you get that story? He said, a kid on a bicycle had a police radio when he gave me the story. I said, go back to New Jersey and bring me that kid. So he brought the kid in, and he was 14 years old, and I said, can you work after school, your mother drives? He said, yeah, I can work here. So he started working for me, but a month or two later, I said to him on the street, I said, don't go on camera, just let us see your hand. And he was breaking stories. That was John Miller, who later became a big star of ABC and all the news operations, and is now #2 public relations man for the FBI. He loved police work.
Yeah. He had a police radio when he was 14 years old, which is interesting.
Got him started.
Right, we've had folks on the air who know Miller and have been working on these type of stories, so that's interesting. And we both had Peter Lance on.
Let me tell you my story about John Miller. By the way, do you know Eric Shawn?
Oh, yes.
Eric Shawn, God bless him, is one of the few who believed me back when I was talking about the wave of fundamentalist terror that was going to strike us. And I'm talking way back when, 30 years. And John Miller was the one who interviewed me when Rabbi Meir Kahana was murdered outside the Marriott Hotel on 49th Street, whereas I was a freelance photographer.
No, he wasn't murdered. He was assassinated.
Assassinated.
There's a difference between
Yes,
being murdered and
yes, Professor. Professor always corrects me. I defer to wit and wisdom here. And Miller was younger at the time. Later, he went on to 2020. And when he wrote his book about the whole episode of terrorism, he used that interview 10 years later as proof.
Well, by the way, Shannon, if they had followed up on the Meir Kahane assassination, they would have found all these people who later on became terrorists.
Well, that's what Peter Lance says. He says that was the beginning of everything.
You know what the worst act of terrorism is?
War.
I'm going to give you an example. Terrorists in Ireland, they call them terrorists. In 29 years, 3,168 casualties. In 29 years, these terrorists, what they called, killed 3,168 people. In 29 years. But in one day, during World War II, 22,800 people were killed. 22,800 every day for 4.5 years. 50 million people. Whereas the Irish issue is they killed 1/3 of a person a day in 29 years. World War II, 22,800 were killed every single day. Which is more terrorizing? War? The difference between a terrorist and a soldier. A soldier has a license to kill. Doesn't know who he's killing. Doesn't know why he's killing. And gets paid. The terrorist knows who he's killing, knows why he kills them, but doesn't get paid. That's why there are so few terrorists. They just don't pay them.
They get paid in the next world with
That's the
73
theory,
virgins.
anyway.
The United States is
That's
giving
the theory.
$21,000 to every new recruit that signs up.
Of the U.S.
$21,000
Oh, I didn't know.
cash before they go to get killed. So they get paid before, right?
Wasn't Saddam Hussein allegedly giving $10,000 to
25,000.
to every family of a martyr?
25,000.
25,000. I'm just being a devil's advocate.
And this room, the devil's advocate, of all places to play the devil's advocate, with a room filled with ammunition and a match.
And I'll tell you, in a revolution, for instance, the revolutionaries or the people in the army do not get paid in a revolution. There were no deserters in the revolution because a revolution is something that they start. The communists only lead a revolution after it starts. They don't start the revolution because communists do not believe
But
in
they
violence.
hope for it to start, right?
Right?
They hope for it to start.
Well, if Professor Corey, if
They advocate it.
under communism, they have
Not violence. They never use violence. Violence is perpetrated by the people who are in control.
Since I'm controlling this microphone, I'm going to say something about communism. Under what they call the Black Book of Communism, which was a record of the communist murders, I think it was 125 to 150 million people died under communist rule.
How many?
I think it was 125 or 150 million died under
Where?
that worldwide.
World War II.
Worldwide, under communist domination,
Yeah.
mass murder. I think
But
30 million died. I think in
Under
Russia.
capitalist domination, 50 million people were killed in World War II. 50 million people are not under communist rule, but under capitalist rule. So don't give me that shit about this other crap.
Bleep, bleep, bleep.
Let me just add that as far as communism, Stalin tried to prevent Spain from going the way of Nazi support of Franco. And it was Franco who turned over that city Guernica to Nazi bombs for Hitler's bombs that Picasso immortalized in that painting. And it was Russia that tried to warn everybody of what's coming. And unfortunately, it was only the Hemingways and others on my mother-in-law's side, God bless her, who tried to prevent all the independents who went over to try to prevent
And
that.
what did Roosevelt do? He put a blockade. He wouldn't let any country support the legal constituted government in Spain. He put a blockade so that nobody can bring help to the Spaniards.
We have only 30 seconds left to go, folks, and let's.
Yeah,
we're
don't
gonna
forget to
continue on.
tune back in at 8 o'clock.
We're gonna continue.
Because this conversation is going to continue.
We're going to continue at 8 o'clock, so stay tuned. But we have 30 seconds left, and do we have any last words? I want to give Jeannie Tartell an opportunity because we've been being a whole bunch of guys and dominating conversations, politics, and social.
Oh my God.
Tell us about your book, just in 20 seconds. Get fit in
The
bed.
book is an easy-to-use exercise book that has very clear photos and very clear instructions on a very easy, user-friendly program that is good for people of all ages and
so that
for all
folks
health.
can survive as long and as active and as smart
Absolutely.
as these two guys are with us now.
You know, you need to exercise. It brings oxygen to your brain.